Good. Let me introduce members of the panel. We have Ferenc Dalnoky-Veres from James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies, and he will be talking about safety-security interface in responding to radiological events. We have Dr. Trevor Findlay from Carleton University. I keep admiring his 4-volume report released last year and strongly recommend you to read his new book based on those reports. We have His Excellency Ambassador Han, who is sous Sherpa for Republic of Korea, and he will be covering the agenda of the forthcoming Seoul summit to the extent it is still possible to share that with the public. And then Dr. Roger Housley, director of WINS, and we now understand that the name of the newly established institution is 50% of your success. WINS sounds very proudly. So he will be talking about the ongoing activity, outreach activity for the industry. I am Igor Kriponov. I've been with the University of Georgia for 20 years, and I represent Center for International Trade and Security there. Since we are dealing with rapidly evolving topic with many unknowns, I think I will break the guidelines offered to moderators and speak a little bit about the general environment to paint where we are. And since it's late afternoon, I will be on a light side, though it's not a light topic, and say that relationship between safety and security has been often characterized as prearranged marriage. Certainly, you represent different cultures, and the notion of prearranged marriage may sound different to you. But what we want to do is to move from this prearranged marriage in this post-Fukushima period to a loving couple relationship. We understand that each loving couple, has its ups and downs. But I think the spouses are supposed to help each other in the kitchen and elsewhere. And in the nuclear industry, this relationship should really need the operation of nuclear facility and whole infrastructure at accepted risk level. It's not a new issue, the way safety and security interact. Unfortunately, humans are such that they need to learn their lessons, after they experience setbacks. So we had wake-up call after the 3 Mile Island, and we learned how to improve design and how to improve management. After Chernobyl, we learned about safety, and we introduced safety culture. So lessons after Fukushima are yet to be learned, but certainly they will be very important. But unfortunately or fortunately, on the security side, we didn't have comparable crisis. And crisis is the environment when we can improve our culture, our attitudes, where we can learn lessons. Indeed, we held summit last year focusing on nuclear security. We're planning to hold another summit next year. At the IAEA, we have one single division of safety and security, though the relationship between the two offices are not very perfect. But what I want to stress is that after the Fukushima accident, we've been witnessing shift in emphasis. Immediately after the Fukushima, experts started talking about safety and security. Then, with some passage of time, we realized that the word security is being watered down. It gradually disappears from experts' parlance, which is quite understandable under the impact of that disaster. If at Chernobyl, Secretary General of the United Nations talked about safety and security, about forthcoming report to be released in September, then at the end of May, G8 limited their work only to safety. The EU, when it was about to launch the stress test, they originally talked about safety and security, but then they decided to limit the stress test for over 140 nuclear power plants in Europe to safety, saying that security is something very confidential, is a prerogative of governments and states, and probably down the road, this security measures will be put to test. But we all realize that sometimes it's meaningless, to test your safety without testing the quality of our security. So what is our objective? I think the objective of our panel is try to figure out how we can optimize the relationship, the interface between safety and security vertically from the highest level of international legal framework, how instruments can work together to reinforce each other, down to national regulations and national legislature, and probably down to the facility level and development of human resources. And also horizontally, focusing on facilities and infrastructure, on transportation, and on radioactive sources. So this is the overlap of different clusters that we need to look into to understand the interface between safety and security, and I hope we will be able to provide some insights as a result of this panel, because each of these clusters will have their own patterns of interaction between safety and security. So one shoe will never fit each and every cluster. We need to select them and see how these two notions can work together. It requires creativity, it requires multidisciplinary approach, and I think it's a challenge for the Seoul Summit to deal with this kind of situation. On this note, I'll give the floor to Ferenc to talk about response in the post-event period, right?
Right. Hello, everybody. So thanks for the ASAN conference. This has been great so far. So I have prepared remarks because I wanted to make sure that my language is as precise as possible. I'm going to be talking about issues of how these two concepts are, safety and security, are linked. But I'm also going to be talking about sort of the emergency response thus far, because Fukushima sort of hangs as this very large, sad cloud over us all. So I think I want to include it in this discussion. The lines between nuclear safety and security are inextricably linked. For example, Fukushima demonstrated how vulnerable nuclear spent fuel ponds and reactors are to loss of cooling, right? Which could be triggered by both intentional and unintentional events. For this reason, an enhanced defense in depth approach is suggested for going to the future. Focus on nuclear security as well as safety, with the specific aim to protect critical reactor elements and securing nuclear materials from sabotage. So for cooling ponds, the most obvious suggested changes are: 1, secondary containment for spent fuel ponds; 2, further redundancy in cooling mechanisms to decrease the risk of a loss of cooling incident. But then security for those measures to prevent tampering. In terms of emergency response, there's an added level of complexity for intentional events as compared to unintentional events. In an intentional event, The principal motives of first responders, fires, ambulance, etc., are to save lives without imposing risk to themselves. However, the role of law enforcement is to preserve, secure the crime scene for investigation by forensic scientists, to eventually attribute the crime to an individual or group. It's well known that the roles of first responders and law enforcement can be at odds because of different roles. But confusion and misunderstanding surrounding radiation, because it can't be seen or felt and so on, and it's also in very minute quantities, might amplify this conflict further. So the Dutch Forensic Institute has presented a very interesting, I think, white paper at the Sous Sherpa meeting in March this year, where they look at this issue. They suggest measures to bridge the gap between first responders and nuclear forensic scientists and traditional forensic scientists as well. In addition to other actions, they suggest a training or education program for both first responders and traditional forensic scientists so that they will be aware of the challenges that these nuclear forensic scientists will face in getting samples and, going by the proper protocol, which is complicated. As a physicist, I know these things. I was just at the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization Science and Technology Conference last week. And interestingly, about 1/3 of the whole conference is dedicated to Fukushima, which I think is a very telling thing. And during a panel, Dr. Wolfgang Weiss, the chairman of several sessions of the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, or UNSCEAR, echoed what many people in the emergency preparedness and response community believe, that government transparency is key. In Dr. Weiss's words, you must provide the public with all the information, which is difficult because there's a lot of uncertainty in the case of a crisis. But he emphasized that public trust is invaluable, and if you lose this trust, you can't recover it easily. This will all be true for intentional or non-intentional events. It was regrettable that the Japanese government did not heed these lessons from past radiological events. We've learned this lesson to some extent. However, it's an encouraging sign that the Japanese government has now recognized themselves that they were slow to release relevant and important information. Fortunately, so I say fortunately, not many radiological nuclear incidents have occurred. There have been several intentional events, but these were more criminal acts rather than terrorist events. So in 2006, the poisoning of the Russian spy Litvinenko happened in metropolitan London. But surprisingly, in a survey, only 11% of the population felt that their health was directly affected. According to the survey, the respondents felt that it was not a terrorist event, and they felt that since they were not in areas known to be contaminated, they were not at risk. Based on this response, we might expect that if this event would have been a larger scale radiological event, the response would have been very different. If the location of the agent is not understood explicitly and boundaries are not communicated properly, then the public will be confused, leading to what's known as the worried well phenomena, where people unaffected seek medical attention. This was a very serious case, the Goiânia incident in Brazil, where you had a cesium-137 medical source, resulted in 4 deaths, 4 fatalities, but then 10% of the population, or 112,000 people, seeked medical attention. Right? So this is a tremendous problem for emergency response. So this worried well phenomena has potentially very serious consequences for a radiological or nuclear event. It might not allow vulnerable people, such as elderly or infirmed or homeless people, to be helped during this circumstance. Now, we have learned from Fukushima, Litvinenko, and Chernobyl that health officials must respond to the public, even if they're thousands of kilometers away from the scene of the incident or seemingly have nothing to do with the incident. But, as you all know, radiation doesn't stop at borders. So to be prepared to provide guidance to the public and to citizens located in affected areas, and must communicate with health agencies, law enforcement, radiation protection, nationally and internationally. That's their job during a crisis. Now, during the Fukushima crisis, we witnessed people on the west coast of the United States wanting to purchase potassium iodide pills, not understanding the risk incurred by the pills themselves, right? Or people in Germany questioning the safety of their food, so-called food angst. But rather than chastising them or seeing them as overreacting, it behooves me to take a step back and recall what the German president of the Federal Office of Radiation Protection said in his 25th anniversary at the Chernobyl incident, which is that this is his quote, I ask myself why it should be a problem that the citizens of a country react particularly sensitively to questions of safety guarantees given by the government. Isn't this reaction to nuclear power plant with 6 reactors that are out of control a very human response, as we do not have sense organs that measure radioactive dangers? I think this really gets to the point of how the public feels. Radiation is different. I emphasized before, radiation is different. The public can't see it, smell it, or touch it. This is why it's so important to design emergency plans based on what humans are likely to do, not what they should be doing. And expecting individuals to shelter in place, for example, for an indefinite amount of time is not a realistic option. So I want to conclude my remarks by warning that in emergency preparedness there also tends to be a false sense of complacency, which prominent disaster expert Dr. Erik Auf der Heide calls the paper plan syndrome. That when a plan is written, it is often not based on valid assumptions that everybody's going to follow the proper procedure. Dr. Weiss, from the other meeting, he also stressed the importance of realistic exercises, such as tabletop exercises, where the emergency response to design-basis events, whether they're intentional or non-intentional, this is where the link is, are tested. And Denis Fleury, I guess he was deputy director of the IAEA, showed this big stack of papers, all the safety manuals that they have. Well, that's one point, but you have to actually test them. It was 30 centimeters high or something like this. However, we must be aware that none of these serious nuclear safety accidents, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, or Fukushima are identical. This is my last point. We've been led to believe that after Chernobyl, another such event, at least I didn't believe, of such gravity could not happen because measures were in place to prevent it from happening. However, I want to warn you that by virtue of these events being very low probability, the same event doesn't repeat. Just like if you get hit by lightning, you're not going to get hit by lightning again. This is simple statistics. So that a robust emergency plan should be designed for multiple design-basis events, including not intentional or non-intentional, and ones that are not known yet. I want to emphasize, I'm humbled by the unknowns, and I hope that the emergency preparedness planners are also humbled sufficiently. That's it.
Thank you, Ferenc. So what I'm saying is that we need to move toward all hazards approach, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so all hazards approach is now actively advocated, in all kind of natural and technical disasters. So as we talk about preparedness and mitigation in radioactive events, all hazards approach should include that too.
Right, and also these events can happen in coincidence with other events, they can happen in combinations.
Okay, thank you. Trevor?
Thank you very much, Igor. I also have some prepared notes, but mainly because I'm so jet-lagged, I think I'll go to sleep if I don't have something to hang on to. So if I go to sleep, just nudge me, Sharon, would you?
We'll try to wake you up.
I've been asked to talk about the global governance aspects of the intersection between safety and security. So I want to just briefly describe the two regimes that pertain to nuclear safety and nuclear security. Then I want to talk a bit about the role of the IAEA in bringing those together. Then some of the challenges to creating more of an intersection. And finally, I've got 5 ideas on what we might do. The nuclear safety and security regimes are quite different and have been negotiated separately. But also, it's important to remember there are actually 3 S's. There are safeguards, security, and safety, which means that it's very hard to get away from the link to safeguards as well. So I will be talking somewhat about safeguards as well. The nuclear safety regime is much older than that for nuclear security. It's more elaborated over the years. It's much more established. There are several significant legal instruments. We weren't allowed to have PowerPoint or slides for this, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to read them out to you for those who aren't aware of them. There's the Nuclear Safety Convention, the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management and on the Safety of Radioactive Waste. There are 2 accident conventions, the Convention on Early Notification of a Nuclear Accident and the Convention on Assistance in the case of a nuclear accident or radiological emergency. Then there are several nuclear liability conventions and protocols which are so complex I couldn't possibly begin to describe them. Then there is the nuclear security regime, which, as I say, is newer, younger, not quite as elaborated. We have the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material. We have an amendment to that convention from 2005. We have something called the International Convention on the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, or ICSANT. We have UN Security Council Resolution 1540 of April 2004 and subsequent iterations of that resolution. So much more of a mixed origin from the nuclear security regime, whereas from the nuclear safety regime they tend to originate from the International Atomic Energy Agency domain. So as I say, these two regimes have evolved separately in response to different perceived needs, and notably in response to international crises in a particular area. There have been windows of opportunity which the international community have used to evolve, amend, and hopefully progress the two regimes. But these have happened at different times, different circumstances. In the case of nuclear safety, major impetuses for growing the regime, reforming it, were the 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl incidents. In the case of nuclear security, the events of 9/11 and the growing awareness that the threat of nuclear terrorism was real, have led to improvements in the nuclear security regime. So windows of opportunity at different periods. As I already hinted at, the treaties all have different origins as well. The nuclear safety ones tend to come through the IAEA. The nuclear security ones come through the IAEA as well as the General Assembly and the UN Security Council. So these different origins make it difficult also to find an intersection between the two regimes. In the case of the two accident conventions, though, and maybe Sharon, you can correct me on this, it would seem logically that the provisions for accident notification and assistance in the case of accident could also be applied to the case of terrorist incidents. I haven't read the conventions in a while, but maybe they could simply be read in that way. The thing that the two regimes have in common is, I think, the role of the International Atomic Energy Agency. It is the paramount global governance institution, and it has taken upon itself the major role, really, internationally in terms of governance in respect of both safety and security. The statute, the IAEA statute, the governing instrument, only mentions safeguards and safety in relation to the IAEA's own project. But over the years, several decisions by the Board of Governors, the General Conference, and the UN Security Council have given what the lawyers say is a mandate to the IAEA to concern itself with both nuclear safety and nuclear security. So that's a place, an institution where these two fields meet, which is quite fortunate. The agency has quite significant programs of advice and assistance and documentation for states in the nuclear safety area. It is much more elaborated. And there's a general view that in the nuclear safety area, the agency's advice, recommendations, assistance can be taken as something of a gold standard. This is not the case in nuclear security. The documentation is less well developed, it's relatively more recent, and states haven't yet decided that what the agency says in this area, nuclear security, is what should go. Nuclear safety is much better funded, it has more staff devoted to it. Nuclear security is more of a pauper. In the case of nuclear security, the agency carries out its task on the basis of 3-year rolling plans, and it has something called the Nuclear Security Fund. But again, this pales into comparison with the nuclear safety work of the agency. So what are the challenges in looking at the intersection between the two regimes? Well, one is that the attitude of states towards nuclear security is quite different to the attitude towards safety. In the security area, states tend to have much more regard for their sovereign rights. They're worried about confidentiality, worried about state secrets, worried that giving information in terms of transparency on nuclear security will in fact harm their security rather than enhance it. In the nuclear safety area, in contrast, there's much more of a tradition of states being more transparent, although not entirely, but there is some feeling that transparency would be a good in itself, even though it is not always complied with. But in the nuclear security area, states are much more wary. So that's a difficulty in trying to integrate these two regimes. Secondly, there's also a north-south division between the developed and the developing countries. Developing countries are rather more suspicious about assistance in the nuclear security area, again because of reasons of sovereignty, and they tend to think that the nuclear security issue is a Western or industrialised nation hobby horse. Whereas developing countries, particularly if they're thinking of having nuclear energy for the first time, think that safety, advice and assistance is really something that they need and are much more willing to accept. Again, the security issue is a problem. A third difficulty is that the IAEA, even though it has made some efforts to integrate safety and security, does suffer from a bureaucratic stovepiping of issues. So safety, security and safeguards tend to be treated in different ways. So even though safety and security are in the same division, there is a reluctance to share information. And the agency also does not have an agency-wide data sharing system. So you can't look up Azerbaijan or Peru and get an overview of that state's situation in terms of safeguards, security and safety. So that is, I think, partly a technical problem, but also it's a lack of vision or will within the agency and amongst member states who have to pay for this new database to actually see the possibilities in integrating. So there is a problem there with stovepiping. Finally, the international stakeholders for safety and security are different. In the areas of safety, it tends to be the regulators, obviously industry, to the extent that it wants to become involved globally. There's the World Association of Nuclear Operators. In the case of security, we're discovering that Interpol is a stakeholder, police forces, security forces nationally. And there is not, as far as I'm aware, an international gathering of stakeholders interested in nuclear security, including everybody, regulators, police, the agency itself, state governments. So that is a problem. I'm pleased to say that WINS, a new organisation in the non-governmental area, is now filling the gap. But still, the stakeholders are very different, and to bring them round the one table is difficult. So, how to proceed? I've got 5 ideas with your indulgence, Chairman. Awareness raising. I think just the fact that we are now talking about the intersection between safety and security is very important. There have in the past been quite a few slogans bandied around, the 3 S's for instance, and then not much has been done about it. But certainly since Fukushima, we've come to the dawning realisation that actually that incident could have been caused by a terrorist attack in at least some aspects. So for the person on the street, you can already see there is a possible link between a terrorist incident and an accident caused by natural events. So awareness is one thing. The high-level meetings on safety and security, although they're still focusing on their own agenda, are also showing some awareness that they also need to take into account the other subject. And it's pleasing to see that the South Koreans, who are organising the Seoul Summit for next year, are thinking hard and deep about how they can include nuclear security as an aspect of consideration in the summit without it overwhelming the nuclear safety issue. So there's thought going there, but that we should pursue that more. So when you're having a meeting on nuclear safety, you should always include elements of security and vice versa at that very high level. The IAEA should seek to embed the linkages between safety and security in all its aspects, and they do need to seek a solution to the confidentiality issue in seeking to ensure a better interface. Safeguards information is treated as confidential. Some elements of security are treated as confidential, although I think that is probably exaggerated, and nuclear safety itself tends to be held also, but not regarded as confidential in the same way. So somehow the agency needs to break down these barriers. Finally, I think the nuclear safety regime needs to emulate nuclear security regime. Needs to emulate some of the best practice of the nuclear safety regime to make them in a way more even, more equal as partners. And notably, peer reviews is something that I believe could be adopted in the nuclear security area, which nuclear safety already does have a significant amount of. So if we bring those regimes to look more like each other, I think the chances of interaction are better. So in conclusion, at the global governance level, much needs to be done to improve this interface between safety and security.
Thank you, Trevor. I think you spoke for 10 minutes, and this is a good example. But let me ask you two brief questions. One question is, at the G8 meeting in France, there was a proposal to make safety standards mandatory. Do you think it will have some implications for the evolving interface between safety and security?
Yes, I think that would help if they were made mandatory, but I'm not sure that will happen. Neither safety or security standards are mandatory at the moment. To my mind, that's the way we should be going.
Because safety and security standards are just recommendations coming out of the IEA.
Right.
And I think President Medvedev proposed to develop mandatory system with peer review and compulsory reports. If the safety side is so strengthened, will it be necessary to do the same regarding security? Or will security evolve in the same direction because safety has been strengthened?
I think the latter. Security will evolve, I think, if safety leads the way. I mean, it's ironic because Russia was the main country that opposed mandatory regulations and guidelines in the original negotiations on the Nuclear Safety Convention.
They turned the tables.
They've turned around, but whether that would then come out in the negotiations is another thing. I mean, the Russians say that now, but whether they would follow through is another thing. Because it's a sensitive issue.
Question is that with nuclear newcomers, countries that are just about to develop their nuclear power infrastructure, will it make sense to combine safety and security training together in one program?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the agency is doing good work in that respect in advising states. You know, they have the milestones document. They provide a lot of assistance, and the agency can be critical, I think, in making that link between safety and security as they're advising the newcomers.
Has anything been done in practical terms? Because I'm teaching nuclear security culture, and nothing has been done, in this regional context in conducting regional courses.
I haven't seen it myself,
okay.
No. Mm-hmm. No. I've only seen the separate bits. But it certainly would be very useful if they could be combined with the agency advises states.
Thank you very much. Mr. Han?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Igor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Han Chung-hee. I'm a sous chef for the next year's 2012 Nuclear Security Summit, Seoul Nuclear Security Summit. I'd like to speak on the interaction between interface between nuclear security and nuclear safety in the context of preparing the summit for next year. So I'd like to focus on more nuclear security issue, and then what is the relationship between nuclear security and nuclear safety. At the first summit in Washington, 2010, I think nobody realized the importance of nuclear safety around that time. So we only mentioned nuclear terrorism by the non-state actors. And also we didn't even that much touch upon the radiological terrorism issue. So we mentioned in communique and the work plan, radioactive resources, radioactive sources. We have to address those issues. But we didn't have a chance to discuss in detail on that particular issue. But Fukushima incident happened the March 11. I think occasion on this issue, on even nuclear security, has been substantially changed. Because I think around this time and probably until early next year, people can talk about nuclear safety issue, radiological issue. Maybe they didn't realize the importance of nuclear security. So that's the reason why we have to address this issue in a more coordinated way with the safety and security, so that we can understand this issue better, so that we can achieve our nuclear security objective in next summit in Seoul. When Fukushima incident happened, I think this give a lot of so-called hint or idea to the probably terrorist group. We don't have to acquire HU and plutonium and smuggling those materials to some kind of devices, improvised nuclear devices, and detonate it. Is very difficult and cumbersome process. Maybe they can just explode some kind of facilities, nuclear facilities, power plant, or to put some malfunction of the all power plant, break down the cooling system and the spent fuel leakage, something like that. So so-called sabotage concept could be more addressed with this Fukushima incident, and also probably terrorists with a lot of report on newspaper on daily basis, real-time basis, on the problem of radiological spread with certain specific radioactive source name. So probably those kind of information can give a terrorist group an idea to widening their means of terrorist activity in the future. So that's the reason why we have to address this issue securely. And as you know, I think once this kind of leakage of radiological materials is happened, I think the consequences and development is very similar, between nuclear safety and nuclear security, because only difference is whether there is a malicious intention. Nuclear security deals with malicious action and intention, but on the other hand, the nuclear safety is coming from just accident, or human accident, or natural accident like natural disaster. But eventually probably common goal, objective is to protect human being, society and environment. So I think if things unfold, I think naturally the two issues are very similar. And then emergency response is also similar. But on the other hand, we can find out some different aspect of those two issues. First of all, nuclear safety issue is mainly dealt within the fence. We call it in the fence, probably surrounding the inside of the power plant. That is the main issues we can tackle. But nuclear security issue, we have to touch border control, customs, and nuclear forensics, and smuggling and illicit trafficking, and also like law enforcement mechanism, Interpol, or domestic law enforcement officers, and also we need intelligence cooperation. Those things we don't deal with nuclear safety. So this is mainly a security related issue. And also another different aspect is, I think we can say that almost all cases, if we increase the some kind of reinforcement measures to nuclear safety, that will also help the reinforcement of security, and vice versa. So I think you can say in that way. But in some cases, as Finley mentioned, that like nuclear security tends to put all informations in a confidential way. On the other hand, nuclear safety, we have to maximize the transparency principle so that people can understand what is going on. And also in case of emergency accident, whether it came from malicious act or natural accident or human accident, in evacuation process, safety purpose will tend to accelerate the very quick, egress and evacuation of people as quickly as possible. But on the other hand, security concern is to check who is the, some kind of inside the threat or any there is any people you have to catch and apprehend at the first stage. I think security issue is a little bit gradual and check one by one to find out the cause of the accident and whole scheme of the accident. So this kind of things are a little bit different. So with this keep in mind, what we are trying to do in next nuclear summit is basically nuclear security summit is dealing with the issues of nuclear or radiological terrorism by non-state actors. So I think this is 50 countries, heads of states, gathering together in Seoul to discuss those primary objectives. So I don't think we will change the name, the Nuclear Security Summit as a Nuclear Security Safety Summit. So, main purpose of our Nuclear Security Summit is very clear. But, question is how we address this nuclear safety issue to reinforce our objectives in Nuclear Security Summit in next March. So we need a very coordinated, task between those two issues. As I said, some issues are, objectives, some are different direction. So we need coordination. We need some kind of integrated approach on those two issues, and also to put some, positive synergy. Those two issues. So I think in IAEA there is always discussion on interface of those two issues from several years ago. But I think with the Fukushima incident and preparing the summit in next year, we have to ask IAEA to have more profound and thorough review on the relationship of those two issues, so that we can, find out what is the most important interface and how we, boost nuclear security with some help of nuclear safety issues. So we need more, I think, professional and thorough study on the nexus of those two issues. I think that's the issue we have to address in the future before nuclear summit in Seoul, and also after the nuclear summit in Seoul. The reason why this exercise is important is, I think in the future, nuclear industry, nuclear power plant, even though Germany has different policy, but I think still there is a mood of nuclear renaissance, and I don't think the countries who have planned to establish more nuclear power plant will drastically reduce their intention to do so. In the future, I think with the discussion in nuclear summit in next March, and also other discussion on high level, like late June meeting on ministerial level on nuclear safety at IAEA, and also UN is trying to organize some kind of meeting in their session in September. So those kind of senior meeting and also Seoul Security Summit, we can show to the public and the all international community that nuclear safety system and nuclear security system and those combined reinforcement could be established with the nuclear security summit, and those kind of grounding work I think is very important for all countries involved and international community understand and the importance of this nuclear power plant and continue to build without big problem. So I think in that sense I think this is very important to address those two issues. So in next year's summit we will address nuclear, as I said, safety in a way that will help the objectives of nuclear security, and also we will have discussion on radiological terrorism, in a more substantive way than first nuclear summit. So this is the task. We have to enlighten the people and press more objective manner. This is challenge we are facing in next security summit. But we will try to our best to converge all participating countries on the understanding of this approach. This is what we are trying to do at this moment. And also in this context, as I said, the role of IAEA is very important to address all those technical issues first, and then we can take some policy level decision based on that technical advice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jong-hee. I have a brief question. You talked about confidentiality, and certainly it's the hallmark of security. But on the other side, confidentiality is certainly an impediment in the way of facilitated interface between safety and security. Will it make sense at the next summit perhaps to develop a set of guidelines? What is really confidential and what can be shared with the public to get it on board? Because unless public is fully informed about security to the extent possible, it will not embrace either security or will not believe in safety. So do you think it is an advisable way to proceed to provide some kind of guidance, probably from the IAEA, the general information that can be shared by all countries that have nuclear power infrastructure?
Yeah, that is another challenge. Basically, in nuclear security summit, among many other issues, we are dealing with information security. That is how we handle the sensitive information and know-hows and any technology information to make those bomb and improvised nuclear device to have those kind of information. So we are dealing with how to control those information. But as I said, we need also some kind of information sharing, particularly on safety side, and also as you said, we have to handle some kind of information on nuclear security area also to the public to a certain extent. But how we handle the certain level, that is also issue. We have to address the interface between nuclear security and safety in the future. So that is the the area we have to address, probably under the purview of IAEA or any other organization in the future.
Thank you. Roger, please.
Thank you. Is my microphone on? I just want to say how much I agree with my colleagues on the panel about the way forward. And I think the timing of what happened in Japan and the Security Summit mean that the Republic of Korea have got an absolutely essential role to play at the moment in helping shape that agenda. And I think the speech we've just heard now, or the comments we've just heard now, and the speech from the minister after lunch were just right, absolutely right, which is to make sure that security stays the focus of the attention of the summit in April, but to also address the interface with safety and to give more priority to the threat of radiological terrorism, which is more likely. So I won't repeat all those things. What I would say, I'll just make a few observations and comments based on my experience and the experience of running the World Institute for Nuclear Security. We now have about 630 corporate and individual members in 55 countries, and we've published a lot of very practical best practice guides. So when people talk about we need closer integration between safety and security, what we do is say, well, what's difficult about that? Where are the barriers? Where are the problems? Where's the best practice? So we try and deal with things in a very straightforward way and address some of the difficulties rather than just repeating the same kind of, wouldn't it be good if we could do a better job of this? So it's actually quite a difficult issue trying to get safety and security people to work together. And the reason for that is because culturally they're very different. The safety people tend to be engineers and technologists and operators, and the security people tend to be police and military. And they don't trust each other quite often. One of the things you need to do with the police and the guard force is to say to them, if this plant is attacked, you need to go and defend these areas, because these are the areas that if they're sabotaged, we have a real problem with the reactor. And what I normally find, and what WINS finds, is that operators and engineers don't like telling the guards what you need to sabotage and therefore what you need to protect, because they don't trust them. And so these issues of trust need to be really worked through, and I like the comment about this kind of professional review. It won't be done in a bureaucratic setting at the IAEA. The IAEA need to support the approach, but it needs to be done by getting people together who are the practitioners, the real police, the real operators, and the regulators, and getting them to talk about these things honestly so we can work up practical solutions. And WINS has made a start on that by producing quite a number of best practice guides, and we will be finishing off about 30 different best practice guides by next year at the summit, and we'll be producing a compendium and publishing it at the summit. The other thing I'd say is that I think the safety community are more interested in integration than the security community. The IEA last year published a document, it's a lovely colour, called INSAG 24, and it talks about the interface between safety and security. And I think it's a very, very good document. The chairman of this IEA committee is a man called Richard Meserve. He used to be the former chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the US. And he invited me to go and speak to INSAG a few weeks ago with our views about the integration between safety and security. And I just wanted to tell him and the panel, his committee, how much we supported it. And one of the concerns the security people have got is they feel as though they're going to be tucked in under the safety management system and therefore lose their independence and their seniority and those things. These are all very practical things we need to address. My final remarks are to really bring your attention to a paper that WINS produced in May, which is about our views on the lessons emerging from Fukushima. It's on the website. It's in the public area of the website. If you happen to want to join WINS, you can do that free of charge and get some of the other documents, but this is in the public area. And it highlights the 5 or 6 lessons that I think came out of a round table discussion in London with both nuclear and non-nuclear people, with legal people, people from the insurance market, etc. So that's something I would say. And finally, I hope that WANO, the World Association of Nuclear Operators, I know they're currently reviewing their remit. I thought their remit was much broader than it is. I think they're having a good hard look at whether they should include some design issues, some emergency response issues, and I've said to their chairman, if you're going to do that, you need to start looking at security as well. And maybe WINS can help with that and affiliate in some way. There's lots of questions which aren't answered. And the US equivalent of WANO is called the Institute for Nuclear Power Operators, INPO, which was formed after 3 Mile Island. And I've been talking to their chief executive to say the same things. And he tells me that nuclear safety operations and security are really very hot topics for INPO and how they all interact with each other. So I think the time is right for a change of attitude. I think the time is right for a change of international policy, and I sincerely hope the summit next March brings that about. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Can we have 5 extra minutes now? Okay, we can. Silence is yes. Roger, I have one question. I've been asking many people who are involved in training security personnel at nuclear facilities, and I ask the same question: have you ever met head of security at a nuclear facility with in-depth knowledge of nuclear physics? And the answer was no. They are either retired policemen, retired military officers, or professional guards with very little, if any, knowledge of the mechanics of nuclear physics. So will it be correct to say that probably down the road the optimal composition of the security professionals would include people with nuclear physics knowledge?
Well, I'm not sure you need to be a physicist, but I do think you need to be a technologist. But it's not just a one-way thing. It works the other way. In the UK, when the design-based threat was first established in 2000, it was sent to me by the regulator, and they stamped all over it, security only. And I rang them up and I said, thank you very much, but this isn't very helpful. Because I need to share the design-based threat with my safety management colleagues. And they said, you can't do it. And I said, I'm going to do it. And we had a 2-day seminar with the safety management with the design-based threat going through it. And their conclusion was, well, actually, we think the threats in this design-based document are much more real and credible than the ones we have to plan for earthquakes and 1,000-year storms and all those things. So the first step is to build this trust between the safety and the security community. And it's, as I say, it's not just one-sided. The security people can be just as difficult about it. And I think you need to bring people together who have operational responsibility for these things, because generally there people do understand the importance of working together. And it's only when you get into the ivory towers of where the nuclear safety people kind of get a bit funny about things and the security people do. The closer you can get to a working level to build these bonds, the better.
Thank you. The discussion at the panel reminded me of a very important lesson from Fukushima. So we are faced with what we call multiple effect events. And these multiple effect events, the earthquake and tsunami, demonstrated that standard safety features are not enough without really integrating much more closely, probably with the security assets and personnel. And I can see 3 scenarios. One scenario is multiple event like Fukushima. And in the existing literature, it is described as not tech events, natural technical events, which means that all regular supply of assistance is limited. And it's what was demonstrated by Fukushima: no power supply, no communication, no roads. So this multiple effect, in other way, net tech events is something, that is another compelling reason why we need to think very hard about consolidating safety and security. Because in the environment of the NATAC event, the security force is either distracted or under very severe psychological stress. The second scenario is multiple effect event on the security side, because terrorists are very flexible people. They can strike at the same time or in one after another at different facilities, at different sites inside the nuclear facility. Or the third scenario may be a combination of the two events, NATAC and MELTAC, malicious event. And in this particular case, insider threat is even more important, because in the condition of confusion, an insider threat can act with impunity and without any assistance from outside or inside. So my message is that we need to factor in these multiple effect events, and if in ordinary circumstances standard features may be a good way to travel, but in the conditions of multiple effect events, this consolidation of security and safety is a necessity. So the floor is open for a limited time for your questions.
Thank you. Benjamin Haute-Couverture, Foundation for Strategic Research in Paris. I would have a few comments and many questions, but we're running out of time, so
Very short
ask one.
And very short question.
Better than that, just one question.
Okay.
So my question is it's a very open question. I was asking that question to myself for a few years, and it does not deal with the link between safety and security, but to your opinion, to everyone, and for the audience, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think, what's the reason why no nuclear and neither radiological terrorist project have ever succeeded to date? Because if we say that the intention is there, and we all have many examples within our heads, I mean, 1995, FT98, 2002, 2003, Chechnya, Moscow, etc. If we say that the intention is there, but the capacity is not there, so we are talking about a risk and not a threat, and the whole behavior and approach of the problem is different. So what's your opinion about why no radiological terrorist attack? Fortunately, of course.
Well, very brief answer. I think the purpose of people with malicious intent, and I'll try to avoid the word terrorist, is to send a message. And for the time being, conventional terrorism really fulfilled that function. But I think gradually we are getting used to conventional terrorism. We no longer pay much attention, as in the past, to bomb explosions, to acts of terrorism. So we are getting adjusted to it. And I believe that as soon as these people with malicious intent feel that their message does not reach as much public as they wanted, they may try to experiment with something more exotic. And for example, I see more cases of mercury use. And this is halfway, I would say, between conventional terrorism and radiological terrorism. So I think we are moving gradually, unfortunately, to that final objective when someone decides to do it as a last resort to attract attention or intimidate the government. Other opinions?
Well, I think it's not hard to do. I mean, there's so many radioactive sources around, and in hospitals there's very, very strong radioactive sources. So insecurity in hospitals can be easily overcome.
I think the question was, why has it never happened? And I think it's a very, very good question. I'm astonished there hasn't been a dirty bomb somewhere. Just amazed that it hasn't happened. If you look at recent court cases in the UK, terrorists were certainly planning and trying to get a hold of the materials to do it. So I think it's in their minds. As I said, I think it's right to give extra attention to radiological security. I was very, very surprised 3 years ago at Glasgow Airport when two terrorists who drove a vehicle into the passenger terminal, and they'd filled the vehicle with propane cylinders and other kind of fuel sources. And the two people who were the terrorists were both medically qualified doctors with access to radioactive materials. And I thought that would have been the first chance that they would have had to put radioactive materials in a vehicle, set it alight, disperse a radioactive plume. And I was very surprised that didn't happen.
Thank you. And just one brief illustration. During the Mumbai attack, terrorists attacked the women's hospital. But on the second floor, there was a huge radiological department. So it's either lack of skills or information or planning. Had terrorists information about this radiological department, I wouldn't be surprised, if they entered and took advantage of it. Yes. Yes, you wanted to ask a question.
Thank you very much. Just short questions. In case of North Korean attack against our nuclear reactors, which is built along the coastline, just like Israeli attack against Osiroko or Israeli attack against Egypt in 1967, if they send low-flying fighter bombers, or if they send submarines, command units boarding the submarine, it can be very difficult or dangerous. How could we defend that kind of situation? How can you avoid that kind of crisis situation? Can you give us some suggestion or advice?
That is very hypothetical situation. So I think it's a kind of attack, unilateral provocation, and sort of quasi war type of situation. But I think that's one of the scenario. Not even just North Korea. Maybe.
When I went to Pyongyang, North Korean guys told me we have target list, including nuclear. That's what I said.
Yeah. So anyhow, whatever regions of source, whether it is terrorist attack or like North Korea, anyway, the resilience of the nuclear power plant and facility is important. So I think that is one area we have to study, whether this kind of airplane attack, like kamikaze type of attack, can explore the leakage of radiological source on facility. That is the technical aspect. How we address those issues. Probably design basis threat or stress test. That is the technical aspect. Different aspect is whether North Korea is trying really do that kind of thing. That is very politically difficult to judge whether North Korea will take that kind of action or not. So they did it at Yeonpyeong and Cheonan, But that is another area we have to think about in strategic point of view, and inter-Korean relationship, and all countries around the Korean Peninsula. That is very difficult question to answer at this moment.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Sonia Moreno from the Nuclear Regulatory Authority of Argentina. I thank you, the panel, and all the audience. I was just thinking about the connection between safety and security and the role of the IAEA in integrating this further. I remember when the physical protection guideline was made, at least up to revision 4, and it was a team approach. It was safety specialists and physical protection specialists working together for this guidance. And I wonder whether this could be a good example, this idea of a team approach rather than two separated expertise going in parallel. The question, I mean, this is one of the things that were discussed. It was also touched in terms of training that I think is important and putting the people working together. My question is, if this should be the approach in order to simplify the guidance to the operators, to the states, to the legislators and the regulators, couldn't it be possible to think in one corpus of norms, just one set of standards that clearly define the guidance for safety and security?
You go first.
I think it would make a lot of sense to do that, and I think we need to do more than that. Sad though it is, I read in Circ 225 Rev 5 on the plane on the way over again. It's terribly sad. You start reading it and it talks about requirements. And then there's a footnote which says none of these are requirements. And then it says these are the responsibilities of the state and the operator. And then there's a footnote which says none of this document talks about responsibilities or legal it's too confused, it's too soft. I think if you benchmark it with the International Civil Aviation Organization, where they have mandatory safety and security standards for aircraft and for airports, that's where we need to go. Because the public need to get confidence in the industry and in its regulation and in the framework. And I just think gone are the days when you can have all of these documents which people can sign up to and then ignore because they're not requirements, they're not anything. And that's, I think, what I would do.
Yeah, I agree. You've said it all.
Right. Corey?
Hi, Corey Hinderstein with the Nuclear Threat Initiative. I hadn't intended to ask a question, but I wanted to follow up on that. Is there any leverage to the implementation of this, of either a so far voluntary or at some point mandatory security requirement or security safety combined requirement? And I'm thinking of things like preferential procurements, or, I mean, where might the leverage actually be in the international system to give, because it's hard for me to imagine that you, given the North-South debate that was articulated earlier, whether you could get something 100% mandatory yet, but are there ways to make it more attractive for companies, if not governments, to want to do the right thing in the sense of implementing these requirements?
Well, as a follow-on, what I would say is we need to be exploring the whole area of insurance and counter-terrorism insurance and how the liability feeds through. And I think the deal you have to strike with industry, because you can't keep on saying to industry, you've got to protect everything against everything. It's just not right. So the deal you have to strike is for the government to say, here is a design basis threat, whether it's for security or safety, and it is a legally binding limit, which means if whatever happens is bigger than that, you will really, really get indemnification for it. Where at the moment, the design basis threat is not a legally binding agreement anywhere. And if the threat turns out to be bigger than the design-based threat, it's still the operator who's liable, and that's wrong.
And if I add a couple of points, that's the reason why I think Physical Protection Convention, particularly amendment in 2005, is focusing on facility protection against sabotage. So new amendment is not entering into force at this moment. We need another 40 countries out of total 95 countries for the requirement of the convention, and also we need 225 Rev version 5 on physical protection. So those two documents should be more implemented and ratified, and so that we can achieve robust regime on sabotage question.
And the peer review system for some conventions is not adequate, and certainly we need to take the existing documents rather than inventing new ones and strengthen them, either by strengthening peer review system or making reports by countries more standard and more transparent. When people see all the gaps, certainly that would create a new leverage against the governments.
Could I just add?
Last question.
Can I just add something to that?
Yes, last question.
Point?
Okay. Then no question.
It's not exactly leverage, but it occurs to me that the number of states who are serious about acquiring nuclear energy for the first time is shrinking. Venezuela's dropped off, Nigeria, Senegal, we even took Israel off our database the other day, which means that the states that are left are much more serious, and they're the ones who are actually who realise most that they need all the help they can get and are more likely to accept advice from the IAEA. And the IAEA then, it's up to them to include the safety security spectrum in the advice they give. So the agency, I think, can be more activist in that respect as they're advising these really serious newcomers like Vietnam and UAE, and they provide advice under the Technical Cooperation Program as well. So that's actually a financial and material incentive for them to take on board the safety security nexus.
Thank you very much. So let me express sincere hope at the very end of our panel that the prearranged marriage will end up in a loving couple at the Seoul Summit. Thank you.